Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about the Trails of Cold Steel anime. Would non-Trails fans be able to enjoy that anime? I think it's because of the One Piece live action. I had made that video about, like, I think the live action is good starting off point for people who might have been nervous or reluctant to jump into One Piece because of how long the series has been going on. And obviously it's not quite the same, but it's also kind of in a similar boat would be the Trails franchise, because that is over a dozen video games that have been spanning the past 20-ish years, less than 20. Like, the games have been running for a long time. It's like, that's a whole bunch of JRPGs you'd have to kind of get into, and I've had that conversation before about whether or not you need to play all of them. I'm not going to retread that conversation too much, but you know, we're talking about a long-running video game franchise, and we're talking about specifically an anime that takes place smack dab in the middle of a giant arc. I consider it like it's a 4-game arc that's kind of split into two parts. Like Cold Steel 1 and 2 are like the first half of the arc, 3 and 4 are the back half of the arc. So you have this anime that kind of falls in between. It expounds upon something that's kind of a smaller part but a major through line in Cold Steel 3 of like the Northern War. I think they do a good enough job that the Northern War thing is its own isolated story. Obviously, like, there's a lot more weight and it means a lot more if you're a Trails fan, which I'm not saying every Trails fan loved the anime. I know there's some people who didn't. Perfectly fine, you know, to each their own type of situation, but I don't know if it could stand alone on its own. Like, now looking back on it in retrospect, because there is enough details, because I can't separate myself enough from it, because I'm a massive, I like the Trails franchise. I love the Trails franchise as a whole, but I love Cold Steel because I played those games so much. I'm obsessed with that arc in particular because it's the one I've played the most, and I love those characters. So I'm deep rooted and invested in this universe, specifically this portion of the arc. But it's so interesting. It is separated enough that I can, to some extent, go like, okay, you can still enjoy it even without the context of the other stuff, because they fill you in enough on like the world, you know. But it is that thing of, but am I adding too much weight to it because I am a Trails fan? I just had this conversation about me liking everything. There's a lot of stuff in it that I'm sure like a typical anime fan would be like, this is very mid, this is generic, yada yada, so on and so forth. It lit up my world. I enjoyed the hell out of it, but it's because we're talking about something I'm already so passionate with and so in love with that I'm like, yeah, just getting more in that world I'm always excited about. But like maybe an outside of that fan base anime fan, I mean, and then even, you know, fans of Trails could still be like, yeah, the animation wasn't great, the story could have been better, so on and so forth. Once again, I just literally the whole video talking about how I'm not really into the whole critiquing situation. Once again, nothing against it, it's just, it's not something I'm interested in. So anything that would, like, any anime fan or Trails fan who could see fault in any aspect, whether it's the animation, whether it's the storytelling, yada yada, characterization, so on and so forth, a lot of those things will kind of go over my head because I don't latch on to stuff like that. Like, it's not something I've actively thought about, but it is just something that I've just had rummaging through my head, and it's not something I've, like I said, clearly mapped out and figured out like a definitive yes or no, because I'm not quite sure. I feel like the answer would be no, but like I said, I think the show, and to be fair, this was earlier this year and it was like a couple months ago, so I might be misremembering, but I think they do a good enough job filling you in about the world of Zemuria and kind of catching you up on like what happened. I mean, because obviously a lot of the some of the episodes do recap you enough to know, like, okay, why is North Ambria in the particular situation that it's in? Like I said, but that could also just be like, yeah, I'm coming in with so much Trails knowledge that even some of the stuff they might not have filled you in on as a non-Trails fan, I already came in with a lot of that knowledge because of my experience. So it is that back and forth that I have, but like I said, I do generally feel like you probably wouldn't, because I'm sure it was specifically catered towards people who are fans. I mean, it's a very specific IP and it's a very specific story you're telling in that universe. If you were like, oh, let's do like something else in that universe, that'd be one thing, because there's stories you could probably make up your own story that takes place. There's plenty of other countries we've heard about but we haven't really deep dive into that universe that you could have like made, but you made specifically about, I mean, to be fair, they also, I mean, this was one of those things too. It's something that's mentioned. You get a little taste of like background, and obviously the anime kind of had a lot of free reign to create new characters and kind of build more of a story around, like, yeah, keeping to the canon while also changing certain not even changing things, just kind of like elaborating more. So it kind of fits in that boat. But what I mean is, at least even then, it's still tied to something heavily directed by the games of like I said, there's countries out there where you know a little bit about like their government and some of the ins and outs of their respective countries and how they work, but even then it's like they're vague details, overarching details, no finer details. The Northern War, like there were some finer details to it, but a lot of it was vague that you could fill in and make your own story, but it still ended up connecting heavily and plays a major role in the Kiseki as a whole, Trails as a whole, but more specifically in the Erebonia arc, the Cold Steel games. It would probably be even less of a debate, really, if, like I said, if it was a more original story, if it wasn't pulling for something directly, as something as direct as like the Northern War. Like I said, if you just like made it a story that takes place in like Le Mans state or whatever, because like Le Mans been this place where it's like you hear about it, but you've never really had any adventures there, at least not to my knowledge. There hasn't been, you know, anything there, but you hear about it because like that's where the Bracers' main headquarters are. Like if you made a story set there, there's even more free reign because you're not directly tied to stuff, once again, because it's the most vague thing of like, yeah, it exists, here's some parameters about it, but you can kind of go wild to some extent with the story. So it's just such an interesting thing. It does beg the question, because I don't know how, like I said, what the reception to Northern War, the anime, was, so I don't know if they have any interest on expanding upon that world anymore in any other animated format, because I think I've talked about this before, but I think the only other animated thing in that universe is there was like a maybe 2 or 3 episode OVA based on Trails of Cold Steel. And I mean, not Trails of Cold Steel, God, Trails in the Sky, I think. That's the only thing I remember coming across that is in existence. I haven't seen it, I read about it. Because then I'm sitting here thinking about it, the Northern War anime is very much in the same vein as like those drama CDs for the Cold Steel games. The one that takes place in between chapter 6 and 7 in Cold Steel 1. I mean, but those are severely canonical, even though they don't get talked about in the game. They're still packaged with the game, I think, specifically in Japan, maybe, or just maybe they're just a completely separate thing, but it's still canonical. And there's also one that takes place at some point during 2, because that ties into Cold Steel 3 and 4 with oh god, Alistair, is that, I'm blanking on the place's name now. It's where Sandy's hometown, because you get introduced to her in 3 and Reen's like, oh, she's from that town, I know about that town, no wonder she knows about Reen in Class 7, so on and so forth, right? I don't know, like I said, I'm already losing the thread here because I'm going on this huge diatribe, but I mean, I'd love to get to know your thoughts in the comments down below, based on some kind of what I brought up. What are your thoughts? I'd love to know from someone who is a Trails fan. Do you think this anime could be enjoyed? Could this series be enjoyed by someone who is a non-fan? I mean, like specifically referencing the Northern War anime. And if you're a non-fan who may have stumbled across it and watched it, I'd definitely love to get to know your thoughts of, were you lost? Did it not mean as much? Once again, is it because you don't have the Trails connection, you were like, eh? You know, and maybe if you had the Trails connection, maybe it would have felt better. I mean, like I said, there's even Trails fans who were just kind of towards the anime anyway. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that. But I'd also love to know what I brought up before. Like, do you think the Trails situation would be even better if they had taken a story that wasn't really directly tied to any overarching stories? Because, yes, it is more of a world-building thing, the Northern War, but it still has a major impact because it affects Reen so directly. It plays such a massive part in his story, especially in 3, like especially when you haven't caught up to him since the epilogue of 2, and knowing that that's part of his journey and how much of an effect that had on him, and you know, and in so many ways, and that directly affects his relationship with Crossbow, which also plays in his complicated relationship with Yuna for a good chunk of time. So, like I said, I'd love to get to know your thoughts. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.